Whether you've seen every single episode of House 9 different times, or you've never caught a single one, there's a really good chance that you are familiar with the show, its formula, and the main character's eccentric personality. But why is this? Why is House so prominent and popular in a sea of so many other similar formulaic shows? Why does this show, that premiered almost 20 years ago, still feel so ingrained in our current TV culture? I think I know the answer.
What is the answer?
That answer is a bit complicated. Let's take an example. In Season 3, there's an episode titled One Day, One Room. At the start of this episode, House is treating patients within the free clinic of his hospital. As most of us know, clinic duty is usually the last thing that House ever wants to be stuck doing, and will go to some ridiculous lengths to get out of it.
Okay, $50 to any patient who is willing to leave here right now.
When his boss, Dr. Lisa Cuddy, hears this announcement, she proceeds to make him an interesting bet of her own.
I'll pay you $10 for every patient you diagnose without touching. You pay me $10 for everyone you have to touch.
Of course, House is all in on this. He gets his next multiple patients to try to do their own exams while he sits across the room. He has one woman palpate her own abdomen, and another patient take his own pulse.
How many?
26.
Either you suck at math, or you're gonna die in 2 seconds.
And when he sees an attractive patient, well, you know.
I owe you 10.
This is funny, cute, and it's fresh. This is why we watch this show. It may not be realistic, but it's fun. House then has to deliver bad test results to 3 different patients. He's probably thinking this will be an easy $30. But when he enters the room of the 3rd patient and informs her that she has chlamydia, she breaks down and lashes out at House.
Don't touch me!
House then comes to the conclusion that she received this STD after being sexually assaulted. House realizes in this moment that the fun and games are over. The tone shift of this episode is an unexpected 180.
I need someone to cover a patient.
House, you committed to...
She was raped.
House tries to pass this patient, Eve, off to somebody with more experience. However, she doesn't want him to leave the room. She insists she'll only speak to House. House tries to explain he's a diagnostician, an expert at solving unsolvable cases. But something like rape, he knows he can't do anything. House eventually sends for the hospital psychiatrist, but look what happens when he does.
What'd you say to her?
Nothing that would make her want to...
Heartbeat's irregular.
What'd she say to you?
Nothing. I gave her a couple sedatives, turned around, she grabbed the whole body.
You must have...
Let's also clarify, House has witnessed multiple patients try to kill themselves in front of him. But this feels different. I mean, look at his reaction. Upon waking up, Eve still insists on only speaking to House. To House's credit, he does actually try to connect with her, opening up about his childhood and even his own personal abuse. We learn things about House we haven't in the show yet. Things his best friend Wilson probably doesn't even know. Later in the episode, we learn Eve is pregnant. House tells her she should have an abortion, but they argue and have an existential conversation.
If you don't believe in eternity, then what you do here is irrelevant.
Your actions here are all that matters.
Then nothing matters. There's no ultimate consequences.
And
do you think the guy who did this to me feels bad?
Did I help you? Make you feel better?
And finally, Eve admits why she felt so connected to House.
There's something about you. It's like you hurt too.
Eve does decide to have the abortion, and after she's discharged, Cuddy praises House for how well he did. House doesn't agree, knowing he didn't do any good at all. It's so rare to see House connect so strongly with any patient. He's only ever interested in solving puzzles. talking to someone about their feelings, he couldn't care less. We're used to House not visiting, speaking, or listening to his patients. It's part of his MO.
Be yourself. Cold, uncaring, distant.
Please, don't put me on a pedestal.
Talking to patients is just another opportunity for them to lie. And connecting with them, that's even worse.
The reason you don't see patients is because if you know them, you'll give a crap about them.
I know you.
If you give a crap, you stop making outrageous calls.
But with Eve, he broke his typical approach. He connected, showed empathy, and listened to another human being. We secretly hope for this in every episode we watch. For House to put away the grumpy, cold loner side and connect. After all,
One day, one road.
I cited this episode as a good jumping off point because I think it's a good example of why people really connect with this show. We're used to a formula with most TV shows, and House is usually no exception. At the beginning of an episode, House's team gets a new patient. No one can figure out what's wrong with them. House berates his team, defies rules, but in the end, saves the patient. Usually. This episode breaks that mold very early on. We know it isn't going to be a typical episode as soon as we meet Eve, because there will be no saving of Eve. This storyline relied on our expectations of what House would normally do in almost every other situation. Joke, distance himself, act cold, but pull a rabbit out of a hat to save the day.
Ta-da!
But when it comes to something so awful like rape, I mean, come on, he's gotta be serious, doesn't he? And to our surprise, he really is. He actually talks to and shows compassion for someone who went through something unimaginable. Because of this, we can empathize more with House in the other 99% of situations where he's a jerk. This is just one example of why I really like this character, and why the show connects with audiences. He's mysterious, selfish, and cold, but sometimes he might just surprise you.
That's not what your mama said. Oh, snap.
I realized I could spend a lot of time in this video talking about television and how important it's been to all of us, and talk about prominent shows from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But I feel like that's a waste of time. I want to focus on the characters, and what's most important, picking the best one. Let's say we wanted to try to pick the best TV character ever. How do we even go about doing this? Is this even possible? It is just an opinion after all. Let's think about it like picking the best pizza. You say it's the best because of the taste, the texture, the sauce, the crust, maybe the price, maybe even something like the customer service at the store. All different dimensions, but all relating back to your opinion of why it's the best.
Pizza! We like pizza!
Let's apply this to TV characters. How do we pick our taste, crust, and texture? Do we measure things like overall acting performance? What about writing quality? Character arcs? Originality? Awards that they won while they portrayed the character? Success of the show? Critic opinions? Internet consensus? What about how influential or genre-defining they are? There's a million different ways to measure the best TV show character, but I think the answer is somewhere within all those things. I recognize that my opinion is nothing close to gospel. I am not God.
House, this is God.
You might disagree with some or all of what I say, and that's not okay.
That's bullshit.
I'll be splitting each character series we choose into two separate parts. The first part will be a full character analysis. I'll spend a lot of time reviewing everything about the chosen character: background, archetypes, personality, motivations, conflicts, and more. This first part will be the first two videos of this House series and take up the majority of these series. The second part of each character series, I'll discuss how this character ranks on a series of metrics. In order to determine if they're the best, we're going to pick about 10 different dimensions and give them a grade on each from 1 to 10. For example, we might give a character 4 in acting ability, 6 in originality, 7 in awards won, so on and so forth. We can then aggregate these numbers into one overall grade and compare them to every other character we analyze. I won't throw too much math at you. This will be fun, I promise.
I'm gonna pretend to go to work now.
It's usually worst in the morning, especially if I've slept on my arm. If I sleep on my back or, with my arms out, I'm usually okay.
So your arm only hurts after you lie on top of it all night?
Yeah.
Well, have you thought about, I don't know, not doing that?
Ironically, up until about 2 years ago, I had never really watched House. When COVID first hit, my wife suggested that we watch it because she'd been a fan when it was on TV years ago. And wouldn't you know, I think our first night watching, we probably watched 7 episodes back to back. The formula really grabbed me immediately. House MD is a television show that premiered in November 2004 on Fox. It's an hour-long series focused around a sharp-witted, blunt, offensive, cane-wielding doctor named Gregory House.
This would have been a fantastic reason to lie.
Hi, Greg House.
House is a diagnostician and heads up the Department of Diagnostic Medicine.
I'm a diagnostician. Find out what's wrong with people and I fix it.
Don't all doctors do that?
Yeah, but they can't dance like I can.
House commands a one-of-a-kind team of specialists who all work together to diagnose and treat patients with very rare, often fatal diseases. House can be described in many ways: apathetic, pragmatic, a loner, and a genius. He can be outspoken, abrasive, and misogynistic, sometimes all at once.
I happen to have a position available on my penis. Wait a second. I think I screwed up that joke.
He enjoys popping pills, defying rules, but most of all, solving puzzles, which leads to saving lives. He lives for rare, interesting symptoms, unknown diseases, and lives by a single motto.
Everybody poops.
No, not that one.
That everybody lies.
That one. There we go. You might be thinking to yourself, why start this video series by picking a character from a show like House MD? House is a good show, sure. Probably better than most on TV, but it's far from the best. House is so intriguing and interesting. He's a genius who sometimes seems to have superhuman intelligence.
Well, your shirt is gaping in the collar. It means you lost weight, you're flushed, that's fever, and you're short of breath. Finally, there's the KS lesion on your face. It means you're HIV positive, you've progressed to full-blown AIDS. So you're sick because your immune system is shot and someone sneezed on you. And I'm excused now?
But also, he's childish, lazy, and offensive for no other reason than to entertain himself.
I'm in pain. Come on, let's go break her arm.
Somehow, though, he's still charming through all those faults. He has so much going on internally when we see him just sitting there, trying to decipher a puzzling case or struggling with a tough decision. When he struggles and battles his loose morality or apparent absence of any type of a conscience. Take, for example, when one of his staff unexpectedly dies. You can tell how emotionally affected he is.
He didn't say anything to any of you. Family problems, bad relationship, financial pressures.
Every single episode, we see House berate his team, belittle them, and essentially make them feel worthless. But we do know, at least on some level, he cares about them. I think the complexity, originality, and amazingly nuanced acting performance by Hugh Laurie gives us one of the most exciting and interesting characters to ever grace TV. Who is House, and why might he be the greatest television show character?
Hi, I'm Dr. House. How long have you been a psychopath?
House was born in 1959 and was raised by a stay-at-home mother and military pilot father. It was clear from a young age that House was extremely smart, but being isolated from others and resenting his father, House became sort of a lone wolf type. As a teenager, during a hospital visit in Japan, House met a Baraku, a cold, efficient, intelligent healer who healed House's friend. This man inspired House into medicine with his unbiased and pragmatic approach. I guess this Baraku was also the hospital janitor? So he was a doctor and a janitor? I'm confused.
Jan Itor. Dr. Jan Itor.
As a teenager, House had excellent grades and went on to excel at Johns Hopkins, even becoming the front runner for an internship at the Mayo Clinic. However, House was expelled due to cheating, exposed by a classmate who got this internship instead. House then was accepted at the University of Michigan on a type of probationary basis due to this misconduct. It's at U of M where House met Lisa Cuddy. House and Cuddy hit it off, even having a one-night stand. When House found out he wouldn't be getting back into Johns Hopkins, and he'd have to redo his final year of med school, House stopped pursuing Cuddy and became a recluse. Years later, before the start of the show, Cuddy approaches House about working at Princeton Plainsboro Teaching Hospital. His unruly reputation already preceded him, so Cuddy created the Department of Diagnostic Medicine, the only one of its kind in all the US. This was to make hospital staff interactions more infrequent and allowed House to choose whatever cases he wanted, whenever. He was basically a living god at this hospital.
I'll be a living god!
House and Wilson had also been best friends for about a decade or so before the show started.
Your boyfriend's name is House?
He's not my boyfriend.
Oh.
We're not gay.
Seriously?
If you haven't seen the first season of the show, you might wonder why House limps and needs a cane to walk. Years before the show started, House had an undiagnosed infarction in his leg while he was playing golf. This infarction caused rhabdomyolysis, or muscle death. Because part of House's leg essentially died, parts of the muscle broke off and went into his bloodstream, causing unearthly pain that could have killed him. Instead of amputation, which was the recommended course of action, House decided on a risky procedure that would allow him to keep his leg. He would rather die than have it amputated.
It's my leg. It's my life.
My legs just went numb.
Unfortunately, after the procedure, House was in agonizing, excruciating pain and chose to be put into a medically induced coma. Stacy, his girlfriend and medical proxy at the time, decided to override House's wish. She didn't have the leg amputated, but her and Dr. Cuddy decided on sort of a middle ground, where they would remove a huge chunk of his leg, where most of the dead muscle was. When House awoke, the pain was better, and he got to keep his leg. But the pain is now constant, which is why he needs Vicodin. House resented Stacy for making this decision while he was in the coma, but she saved his life. Let's say someone asks you to sum up your entire personality, your interests, everything about you, in just 5 words. Could you do this? How difficult would it actually be? Why don't we try this with House? Is it possible with him?
Totally, dude.
How about we make it an interesting acronym you might have seen before? House sure loves to feel good. He is definitely a hedonist. A hedonist chases the highest possible highs and mitigates feelings of sadness and despair any chance they can.
Man's an addict.
Right, addicted to pills, not gambling.
It's the same thing. Drug abuse, drinking, gambling, they all fire up the same pleasure centers in the brain.
A hedonist chases the highest possible highs and mitigates feelings of sadness and despair any chance they can. And of course, this is House. He plays video games, He pops Vicodin like they're breath mints. He fraternizes with prostitutes and carelessly drives a motorcycle. In one episode in season 7, he jumps from the 5th story of a hotel balcony into a pool. I don't think we've ever seen House smile like this in the entire series. Motivational hedonism claims that behavior is ultimately determined by increasing pleasure and decreasing pain. In episode 3 of season 4, titled 97 Seconds, House treats a clinic patient that electrocutes himself in a wall outlet.
Paramedics said I was technically dead for 97 seconds. It was the best 97 seconds of my life.
Flood of endorphins and serotonin was released, and it's what gave you the visions.
No. Believe me, it wasn't chemicals. I've done every hallucinogenic there is. This was way bigger than that.
Afterwards, House actually electrocutes himself to see if he can feel the same way.
That's stupid.
9 times out of 10, House doesn't take pills because his leg physically hurts. He does it to numb any emotional pain he feels. He drinks when a patient dies, watches soaps to avoid clinic duty, plays video games instead of helping out his coworkers and teammates, and pops pills instead of supporting someone close during a health scare. He numbs his low feelings any way he can and never turns down some fun.
Is that why you're so sad?
I'm not sad, I'm complicated. Chicks dig that. One day you'll understand.
The hospital is busting its tail and you're... What are you doing?
Trying to think of anything except the produce department at Whole Foods.
He's like a superhero whose superpower is to say the worst possible things imaginable.
Your attitude towards supervisory personnel is disrespectful, and a disturbingly large proportion of your comments are racist or sexist.
That top makes you look like an Afghani prostitute. Would be an example of that.
What is wrong with you?
I mean, it takes skill to be this outspoken. Let's be honest, House is not a coy guy. He is often very direct in the way he mocks people, or the way he calls out private details about someone's personal life for everyone to hear. He's quick to say things that are offensive and way out of place. Sure, he usually says what we're thinking, but does that make it better?
Sorry, I missed that. Hearing's been off since the Ricky Martin concert. Some cholo kicked me in the head.
House will say the worst thing in a situation and smile as he says it. Most of us would probably be fired within seconds of saying things House does, but somehow he gets away with it. Sometimes it's charming and fun.
I just need a good friend.
But other times it's deeply offensive, and we wonder why we even gravitate towards this character.
The thing you're about to demand is gonna have to wait until...
You can go suckle the little bastard child who makes you feel good about yourself.
Why would you say those things to me?
You pretend to buck the system, pretend to be a rebel, claim to hate rules, but all you do is substitute your own rules for society's. And it's a nice, simple rule.
House really hates being told what to do, and despises most figures of authority. Anytime he's told to do something by someone above him, he usually goes well out of his way in the complete opposite direction, just to be spiteful. However, this isn't always the case. In Season 1, House is blackmailed by Edward Vogler, the newly appointed chairman of the board at his hospital. Vogler gives House a tough choice: to either give an ingratiating speech about a new pharmaceutical drug or fire one of his staff.
Okay, no hard feelings, but I hate you.
House decides to give the speech. Sort of.
Eastbrook Pharmaceuticals' extraordinary commitment to research excellence is exemplified by their new ACE inhibitor, a breakthrough medical approach that will protect millions from heart disease.
Where are you going?
Also, nitpicking here, why the hell isn't the pharmaceutical company's name capitalized? Come on now. Because he gave the Guinness World Record book's shortest speech ever, Vogler asks House who he's going to choose to fire. House, instead of answering, does this.
You know how I know that the new ACE inhibitor is good? Because the old one was good. The new one is really the same, just more expensive. Whenever one of his drugs is about to lose its patent, he has his boys and girls alter it just a tiny bit, patent it all over again, making not just a pointless new pill, but millions and millions of dollars.
There's something to this Vogler arc. House sees through this guy.
Hey! You're killing her! See, I thought you were the one trying to ram her into a drug trial 5 minutes after
knows
surgery.
the risks. She was fully informed.
Well, the guy running the study sure wasn't.
Not his life, not his call.
His study, his call.
Right, so she kicks off, his numbers look bad.
The numbers look bad, the study looks bad.
Which would cost you money.
Yeah, and keep a life-saving protocol off the market.
Well, thank God you were here to save all those lives.
House defies Cuddy willy-nilly, but he does knowing it, he still respects her.
I need you to wear your lab coat.
I need 2 days of outrageous sex with someone obscenely younger than you, like half your age.
It's not the same with Vogler though. We could tell he doesn't have the best intentions, and makes his decisions solely based off of what's best for the hospital finances. That gives House more willingness to cut him down and defy him, and even though he's breaking the rules in a spectacular way, he's doing it for the greater good.
How can this be for the greater good? Shut it!
Another instance of House breaking the rules also comes in Season 1. When House violates a do not resuscitate order and intubates a dying patient, he gets served papers and sued for assault. House does this because he knows he can save the patient's life. Rules everyone follows are just another reason House isn't able to save someone.
A person who has the guts to break a bad rule, they're a hero. House doesn't break rules. He ignores them. He's not Rosa Parks. He's an anarchist.
I think as the show goes on, House defies rules for what I will call less important reasons. Whether it's a good or a bad cause, he will reliably defy authority. Let's also be very clear. If I were to talk about every single time House breaks hospital code, this video would be 5 hours long. House is the walking embodiment of someone you can't control, because he'll find a way to not follow the rules just to make a point. He hates doing things the right way, and it gets him into trouble time and time again. It even gets him shot. It all goes down to even his basic appearance.
When you entered, I noted your shirt hadn't been pressed. You hadn't shaved in quite some time. I extrapolated you were a person for whom detail was not a major concern.
He even uses his cane on the wrong leg. House is the walking embodiment of a renegade.
House!
House! House!
The creator of the series, David Shore, has said on multiple occasions that the character is extremely heavily inspired from Sherlock Holmes, the world's greatest detective. House draws a multitude of similarities and inspirations from Holmes. It's revealed in Season 3 that House lives on 221B Baker Street, which is where Sherlock Holmes and Watson also lived. Also, look at the names. There are even several name drops of characters from Holmes in the show, like Adler and Moriarty. Sherlock Holmes was antisocial, had almost no friends, and experimented with drugs.
You wearing any pants? No. Okay.
In addition, Watson limped from an old war wound that he had once received. Sound familiar?
Oh no!
Other similarities include how they both loved drugs, fraternizing with women, were musically talented, and how the relationships in their lives were strained due to bromances.
We're grown men over the age of 30 who moved in together. We're 2 tigers away from an act in Vegas.
You friggin' gays!
Probably one of the biggest similarities between Sherlock Holmes and House is how they are both masters of observation and can solve mysteries no one else can.
I have a gift for observation, for reading people and situations, but sometimes I am wrong.
I think House MD almost feels more like a mystery than medical drama sometimes, which in my mind is better. It helps excuse some of the ridiculous medical inaccuracies in the show.
Got a better plan?
Much.
Anybody hear a...
I shot him. He's dead.
Are you out of your mind?
House is able to surmise rapid conclusions from just speaking or looking at someone for mere seconds, just like Sherlock Holmes. For example, from a very brief meeting with one of his team members' fathers, House is able to deduce that they have cancer.
A little blue dot under your collar. It's a tattoo for guiding radiation treatment. I was looking for it after I saw what you had for breakfast. Brown rice, vegetables, macrobiotic diet. Popular with Hollywood starlets and cancer patients.
In episode 18 of season 3, House makes extremely fast connections from only simple observations about a sick patient during a flight.
I'm a doctor too.
You haven't examined him.
Korean male, mid-30s, 5'9", 160, bald, scar on the right side of his jaw, medic alert, bracelet on his left wrist indicating that he is allergic to at least penicillin.
Our only choice is to assume the worst.
Good point. On the other hand, I am a board-certified specialist in infectious disease. She assigns parking spaces.
I think one of the largest curiosities is manifesting a character like Sherlock in a very contemporary medical environment. Sure, there are plenty of other shows and movies derived from Sherlock Holmes, especially lately. Some of them are really good.
Fire! Call the fire!
But I think making a character supernaturally gifted in observation and intelligence within a hospital setting makes for a really interesting character. Seeing House play video games and air guitar and watch monster truck rallies instead of the intellectual pursuits that Holmes had is a fresh take. Plus, other similarities, which I won't mention.
Why not? Why not date you? It's brilliant. We've known each other for years. We've put up with all kinds of crap from each other, and we keep coming back. We're a couple.
Oh my God. You're sleeping with me.
Will you marry me?
Wow. There is a code. Bros before hoes, man.
This is it. This is the biggie. Explanations are at the core and heart of what drives House's motivations. He needs answers, like you and I need food and water. Answers with patience.
What did we screw up? What did we miss? I need to know.
Co-workers.
Which means your problem's about you.
This should be interesting.
Losers love company, and if even a misanthrope like me has a chance at happiness, it's gonna be pretty lonely on that landfill of loserdom you call a marriage.
Diagnoses, with his personal life, with anything. You might think that makes him a hero being a doctor, right? Finding answers usually means saving lives. There's probably a part of him that finds satisfaction in discovering diagnoses that lead to saving lives, but it's more about chasing the solution to the puzzle than anything else.
Some doctors have the Messiah complex. They need to save the world. You've got the Rubik's complex. You need to solve the puzzle.
In House's mind, it's about dissecting a mystery, not about saving someone's life. Remember, he's Sherlock Holmes. He is more of an investigator, solving a mystery than a doctor at times. It feels like a patient getting better is just a byproduct of House's neurotic belief in needing to figure things out. Everything needs to have a reason behind it, or else the world doesn't make sense to him. This is also why House is an atheist.
You don't believe in God?
I did. Then I grew my curly hairs.
In episode 9 of season 5, titled Last Resort, House and company are held up at gunpoint in the clinic when a dying patient demands that they find out what's wrong with him. The tension in this episode is at an all-time high, with the crazed man waving a gun at House and others, even shooting someone at some point. Towards the end of the episode, House needs to perform a CT scan on the patient to figure out the diagnosis. He convinces the crazed lunatic he needs to give up the gun in order to properly perform the scan. When the scan doesn't confirm a diagnosis, House gives the gun back to the patient. He needs this hostage situation to continue in order to find out what's wrong with his patient. I think the funniest thing about this whole scene is look at the man's reaction. He looks super confused too. I want to make a point here. House isn't acting heroic. He's not Captain America, right? Selfless, a martyr, saying you can shoot me, threaten me, but I'm still gonna stay here and find out what's wrong with you because you'll die otherwise. This is not what's happening.
Houses.
House's obsession with finding the diagnosis is worth flirting with death for, and even endangering others. This type of obsessive behavior happens a lot on the show. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but in a well-known episode from season 5 titled Simple Explanation, one of House's team members named Kuttner, portrayed by Kal Penn, very unexpectedly kills himself off camera. If you're unaware of the backstory of real-life events, Kal Penn actually took a position on President Obama's cabinet and had to be very suddenly written off the show. The episode, while sudden, was praised for how it handled suicide, something that's unexpected, devastating, and oftentimes without any warning.
Something like 25% of suicidal people show no outward signs of depression.
No. 25% of suicidal people have friends who didn't notice anything and don't want to feel guilty.
Kuttner's suicide is really the spark that leads to a massive mental break for House. In this episode, House is obsessed with chasing the answer. He goes to his apartment, searches through his possessions, visits his grieving parents, and deeply searches for any warning signs he might have missed. At one point, House is even convinced that Kuttner was murdered. This to House is more plausible than him not seeing this coming.
You worked with him every day for 2 years, and you never saw this coming.
No one saw it coming.
But you see everything coming. This has never been about what you missed. This is about why you missed it. You're terrified that you're losing your gift, losing who you are. And I'm terrified of what you'd do then.
At the very end of the episode, instead of going to Kuttner's funeral in a very somber scene with everyone else from the cast, House actually goes back to Kuttner's apartment again, searching through pictures, observing, thinking. He can't rest until he understands why. And at the very, very end of the episode, we see that House, looking through dozens of pictures of Kuttner, discovers a somber one. House sits down as the camera fades to black. Anyone can take a picture that looks sad, but to House, this was almost like the final clue that he missed. He missed the warning signs. This search and obsession was more important than paying tribute to a trusted colleague as they leave our mortal world. The painful fact and reality is, we don't always get answers. We don't get warning signs. House is by no means a caring, warm person, but if he had seen signs, I'd like to think he would have intervened. Suicide is obviously a very serious topic. All this House talk aside, please, if you need help, there are resources available, day or night. House can be considered an anti-hero. I think most people have an incorrect assumption of what an anti-hero actually is. They usually think, oh, it's just a bad guy that does good things, or saves people. But that's usually not the case. Think of conventional heroes. Atticus Finch, Ellen Ripley, Batman, Harry Potter. What do all these characters have in common? They're selfless, they fight evil, and they're noble individuals who persevere in the face of adversity. They do what is right regardless of the challenge in front of them. Anti-heroes are defined as characters that tend to lack these conventional heroic traits. They tend to lack morality and ethics, be less courageous, more selfish, and even make questionable personal decisions. And yes, House does solve mysteries that lead to saving otherwise doomed souls. He might do it more for solving puzzles, but people are healthy and alive because of him. That makes him at least partly heroic. But House absolutely also lacks ethics, morality. It can also be very selfish and cynical. He shows almost no remorse for his extravagant and selfish actions. Yes, he usually does make the right decisions to help his patients, but he almost never goes about it the right way. And he is surely not a good role model for anyone else. I mean, have you met him?
Where's Cuddy? In this drawer. It's a rescue mission.
An archetype is a type of character that represents a universal pattern we can recognize throughout all media and cinema. House falls into 3 character archetypes: the jester, the magician, and the outlaw. Jesters are carefree, mischievous, clever, and very impulsive people. They live in the moment, chase pleasure, love to be entertained, and tend to be unburdened by anything at all. House indulges in drugs and uses his wit to hide his true feelings. He makes fun of everyone. No one is an exception. Other famous TV characters that might be jesters would include characters Joey from Friends, the Todd from Scrubs, and Chang from Community.
So don't question Senor Chang, or you'll get bit. You bit. Ya bit.
The magician archetype is described as a character that is exceptionally charismatic, driven, intelligent, and knows how to solve puzzles. "I've got the world on a string" is their mantra. House is a magician. He can make complex, interconnected concepts almost effortlessly. He leaves people in awe. There's no limit to his genius. He speaks several languages.
Brazil, on the other hand, has castanhas do Pará.
He can play the harmonica, the piano, the guitar. Hell, he can even sing. It helps that Hugh Laurie is very musically talented in real life. This is a nice addition to House's already extraordinary skill set. Other examples of magicians would be Gandalf and Yoda. Some might also consider House an outlaw. The outlaw archetype reflects a character that tends to be an outcast and needs to better the world through questionable means. Outlaws like change, but the way they go about it isn't always the best. They tend to alienate any friends who might support them and lose their path in life often. Outlaws disagree with authority figures and subvert rules just to prove they're right. House solves his cases this way and despises all authority figures, as I've mentioned. He feels like he's above the law and rules don't apply to him. Fictional characters that are outlaws would include Katniss Everdeen and Wolverine. Let's now shift our analysis to a number of different tests and personality assessments that House might theoretically take. First, let's talk about House's IQ, or intelligence quotient. When it comes to House's actual documented intelligence, I don't think it's ever explicitly stated. But we know from episode 1, he's a genius.
I am a board certified diagnostician with a double specialty of infectious disease and nephrology. I'm also the only doctor currently employed at this clinic who's forced to be here against his will.
Hey, you don't have to raise your voice.
His observational skills and ability to solve undiagnosable cases is unmatched. He's a legend to everyone he encounters.
The two of you have a combined IQ north of 300.
It's also true of 5 morons.
Dumb.
This would imply House's IQ is roughly half of north of 300. But let's be conservative and say it's 150. That would still put him above the 99th percentile of intelligence. In other words, House would score better than over 99% of anybody that took an IQ test. Probably closer to 99.7%. It would be nearly impossible to find another TV character at House's level of acumen and brilliance. We do know House got a perfect score on the MCAT. This is a nearly impossible task. Now let's imagine if House took the Wonderlic exam, a timed cognitive ability test aimed at measuring intelligence and problem-solving ability. The Wonderlic exam is very famously given to NFL players in the United States, where they can score on any range from 0 to 50. The average for NFL players, along with the general population, is 20. I think it's safe to assume that if House's IQ is as high as it is, he'd probably get a 50 on the Wonderlic. Now that we've talked about House's overall intelligence, let's talk about the different types of intelligence. There's a lot of different ways to measure this, but I'm going to use one of the more popular theories that categorizes intelligence as broken down into 9 different dimensions: interpersonal, spatial, naturalism, musical, logical mathematical, existential, interpersonal, body kinesthetics, and linguistic. Again, this is all subjective, but I'm taking some pretty educated guesses based on what we've seen from the show. Let's rank House on each of these from 1 to 10. The first type of intelligence, intrapersonal, is the ability to understand and know your own inner thoughts and feelings. House gets a 2. Spatial intelligence is being able to perceive insight from the visual environment around you. House gets a 10 on this one, just like Sherlock Holmes would. Naturalist intelligence is the ability to identify, classify, and manipulate elements within your environment. I think House gets probably an 8. Musical intelligence, pretty self-explanatory. I'd also give House an 8. Logical and mathematical intelligence is next. I think this one is also pretty easy. House gets a 10. Existential intelligence. This is the ability to use your intuition and insight to answer deep questions about existence. This one's tough. House is not spiritual, he doesn't believe in life after death, and doesn't really bother with these types of questions. He tells people flat out there's nothing there. I'd give House a 4. Interpersonal intelligence is next. This is being able to understand social situations and the behaviors of others. This is interesting. As I've said before, House is an introvert and doesn't really understand his own feelings and wants. But I think he's excellent at being able to understand social situations and how other people are acting. I give him a 9. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence. This is being able to process information through your own body movements, your hands, and things you can physically control. We don't really see a lot of proof of this, so I'll give him a 5. And finally, linguistic intelligence, being able to understand written and spoken language. I give House a 10. We've seen him speak about 5 to 6 different languages on the show. And just to recap, let's switch gears to a couple different personality inventories and assessments. Let's look at House through the lens of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI. The MBTI is a questionnaire that indicates differing psychological profiles and preferences and how people perceive the world and how they come to make their decisions. The assessment is made up of 4 different categories: introversion versus extroversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, judging versus perceiving. For each of those 4 groupings, depending on how you answer, you'll lean towards one side. In my opinion, House would fall into the category of INTJ. INTJs are classified as the architect. This is one of the most intelligent and capable personality categories, and also one of the rarest. They're rational, pragmatic individuals. They are independent and prefer to work alone. And most of all, they're very, very curious. Consider them pioneers, if you will. INTJs are also hypercritical, arrogant, selfish, and tend to have poor romantic relationships. They disregard emotions as irrelevant. They often appear uncaring, although deep down they usually aren't. Other INTJs would include Elon Musk, Walter White, and Michelle Obama. Now let's look at House's psyche from the perspective of a popular personality inventory called the Neo-PIR. The Neo-PIR is a standard psychological questionnaire that assesses an individual on 5 different scales, known as the 5-factor model. The factors cover emotional, interpersonal, social, and attitude-based personality traits. The 5 factors include openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, and agreeableness. The first trait, openness to experience, tends to manifest as high levels of intellectual curiosity. They tend to want to try new things and hold unconventional beliefs. Someone with a high openness to experience is usually more unpredictable, less focused, and more likely to engage in drugs, promiscuity, and risky behavior. Should come as no surprise, as House rates extremely high in openness to experience. I'd put him in about the 90th percentile. The second factor is conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is the measure of an individual's self-discipline. Individuals who rate high in this metric tend to stay organized and think before they act. They are efficient, careful, and thoughtful. Those who have low conscientiousness tend to be more disorderly and laid back, and are more likely to engage in antisocial or illegal behaviors. In my opinion, House rates pretty low on this one. I'd put him at about the 25th percentile. House doesn't think before he acts, does not concern himself with how other people feel, and is not organized or careful. He is rash, bold, antisocial, and of course, as I've said, loves illicit activities.
I need the drugs! Works for Jack Bauer.
That would explain everything.
The third factor in the Neo-PIR is the extroversion dimension. Extroverts tend to be engaged in the outside world. They have excessive amounts of energy and always want to be the center of attention. In my opinion, House falls at about the 40th percentile for the extroversion scale. This one was a little tougher. It's all about whether House is more extroverted or more introverted. Where does he put all his energy? Yes, House loves to talk and loves being the center of attention. However, we also see him playing the piano in his apartment alone and skipping out on plans just to go home and watch monster truck rallies and housewife shows. In most of the context we see House, we see him being loud and dominating the room he's in, but I do think that he's an introvert at heart. The fourth factor from the Neo-PIR is the agreeableness dimension. Someone who has a high level of agreeableness tends to be a warm, approachable, friendly, tactful person. Think of a Mr. Rogers type. Someone who listens and shows that they understand and feel your pain. Agreeable people tend to be empathetic and concerned about the others around them. It should come as zero surprise that House rates extremely low in the agreeableness dimension. He doesn't show empathy, he is not tactful in the way he speaks, and he's not warm and friendly. He places his own self-interests above all others, is unconcerned about the well-being of his coworkers, and is very untrustworthy and even combative at times. The last personality trait on the Neo-PIR is neuroticism. Individuals with high levels of neuroticism tend to be more moody and experience feelings like anger, anxiety, sadness, and jealousy. They're described as often being self-conscious and shy, and tend to have trouble controlling urges and delaying self-gratification. To me, this one is a little bit less clear. The other four dimensions I think were a lot more straightforward, since he has such a polarizing personality. I put House at about the 30th percentile. Neurotic characters are more likely than average to be moody and experience feelings such as anxiety, fear, anger, and frustration. I'm not sure this is always the case with House. He doesn't seem to really fly off the handle with anger, and seems pretty apathetic about things that really affect him and should make him jealous.
Right. Couldn't be that she finds me interesting, attractive. Has to be that she's insane.
He doesn't really get revved up by his coworkers. He's too pragmatic and smart for that. The traits that I'm describing as a neurotic character make me think of characters like Elliot from Scrubs or George Costanza from Seinfeld. They are neurotic characters because they overanalyze everything and are very emotional. House doesn't really fit into that category. I know that we are 50 minutes in and we still have a lot left to cover. House is a wild, fun character. He's so intricate and deep, it's why I really like talking about him. I wanted to spend a lot of time in this first video really taking him apart, looking at his personality through a kaleidoscope at every hexagon, every shape. The second video of this series is going to be a little bit more structured and focus on larger aspects of House's character. 3 in particular: conflicts, relationships, and character arcs. We're going to jump into how he deals with conflicts, his romantic relationships, and his character arcs, both per season and his overall arc in the show. Part 2 will be coming soon. Thanks so much for watching.